I am trying to make an actual TV show.
It's so hard to find a funny show that isn't filthy. I watch them, but I don't want to.
Let's do this.
Fire, like lots of fire.
So dedicated.
So cool. Where's it go from there, you know?
Oh, have I got your attention now?
This is bigger than you can handle.
You got any plans for tonight?
But what are you waiting for? Let's go.
Cool? Absolutely!
Daniel Young playing Gabriel. Hi, how are y'all? Let's sit down.
Thank you.
Do y'all want a liquid death?
Oh, no, I'm all right. I'm all right.
Thank
you for having us as well. Thank you.
Oh, I mean, we talked a little bit outside and how I admitted I was crying like a baby when I saw this. Like, even in, like, not even the sad parts. I was just like, I just like seeing this on the screen, right? But for Dav, what was the initial inspiration and to put the pen to paper to tell this story?
Yeah, well, I've been writing for a long time, but about 7 years now, my husband and I, we adopted 2 boys. And and it was, it changed my life profoundly, as a human being and as an artist. And also, and it was tough. It was so tough because, these kids have lived through so much trauma. They're having to leave their birth families, that have to leave foster care and come in and move in with a bunch of strangers, really. And also, my husband and I, when you start adopting, when you become a parent, all this stuff comes up about your childhood, the way that you were parented, and all these kind of. It's difficult, and you can find it quite triggering actually when you're trying to deal it, and you're all going through these things. And I remember thinking, my God, this is so dramatic. I went, someone should write a TV show about this. And then I went, oh, and so that's where it came from. And also, I hadn't really seen adoption, I don't think, authentically represented on screen before in the way that I was experiencing it. And I wanted to tell that story, because I knew it would be a story, because it's such a universal story, really, because it's about, we've all been children to someone, and regardless of your sexuality or whatever, I think the parenting is it's a universal story that can connect with people.
And for Sean, how did you connect to the story? Like, when you first read it, like, what was did you cry like me? What was your initial reaction to kind of did you get just the pilot or did you get the whole thing?
Hello, everyone. So I was sent all 3 scripts, which often you're not. You're often you just get the first ep. And I've known Dav for a long time. I've known Dav's work for a long time. And everything that I know is brilliant about Dav was on every single page of this script, and I cried a lot just sitting in my living room reading it. So I knew it was really special from the start, and I texted you, didn't I, actually, straight away, because I read a lot of scripts, and it's really rare that you read something and feel that sort of instant connection with it. You tend to maybe sometimes, or for me anyway, I tend to have to sort of like talk myself around to like imagining doing something or wanting to do something. But with this, they are the most perfect scripts I've ever read in terms of the way they're structured and the heart in them. So we all knew when we went to go and make the show, it was never a case of, like it is with some shows or films, that the script is just the starting point and then the process of making it kind of takes it on its own journey. Whereas we were all so adamant that all we wanted to do was execute what was on the page. And I don't just mean in terms of the dialogue and the specificity of that, but the soul of Dav's writing was what we all wanted to capture and make sure we got onto the screen.
Yeah. And like the title itself, it's giving Peter Pan, or Lost Boys and Fairies. And at first I was all, when I saw the title, I was like, wait, is this a fantasy? But you do incorporate these fantastical elements, which I was like, just watching it and seeing the devil in the bathroom, I think, especially a lot of queer people, I felt like that represents our shame, and that I think if you're queer in the audience, you carry that for the rest of your life. It's a tough journey, and like just seeing that montage and like it was a lot in like I don't know how long that was, but you know, how did you want to frame this narrative and include these kind of hyper realistic moments?
Yeah, I mean, because it's true. It's crazy. When I got married to my husband, and I was standing there and I was making a speech, and I said, you know, it was such a moment because I was remembering back to childhood and going, this was impossible when I was a kid. You know, adoption was impossible. You know, the age of consent was only brought down to 16 in the year 2000. You know, so when I was in school, you know, I was committing illegal acts really. You know, and we were living under Section 28. You see Maggie Thatcher in there, where you weren't allowed to speak about sexuality in school. And so it's a really weird time because we're celebrating these milestones and equality, and in a kind of the bubble of my community, we've come so far. And yet, of course, and the therapist says it, you know, that we're still carrying decades of shame, and that internalized shame has had such a profound impact on the way that I have been and the way that I have lived my life. And so I wanted to be able to like try and find a vernacular to articulate that visually. And of course, you know, actually growing up, and I also grew up very, very religious. I went to chapel twice a day and all, you know, so I believed in Satan. Satan was real. I was going to hell, you know, and that was as
I'm going to,
you know, that was as clear as day. And so actually looking back, I was living in my own, you know, in my mind, I was living in a horror film. And that's why that scene I think is quite interesting, because it's like a horror film, because that, you know, and it's also funny, and it's like, you know, because the cut to Gabriel saying, you know, oh, it didn't really affect me in that way. We all know how massively it did. So for me, I think, you know, magic realism, all of that is intensely realistic, because we have an experience in life where we are both living in our minds and in the actual concrete reality within which we exist. And so I wanted to show both those things. There's a concrete reality that Gabe lives in, but in his internal mind, he's got all of these like fantastical, theatrical, you know, like the scene where in the adoption day where they all start fighting each other and all that kind of stuff. That's just basically how, you know, it's very realistic to my everyday.
No, but for Sean, like, you know, while playing the character and just going through this process of creating this series, like, what did you learn about yourself as, you know, an artist, and also just like, what did it bring out of you, like, as a human being in general? I know that's a heavy one.
It's kind of hard to summarize what this experience meant to me. I've been lucky enough to do lots of jobs that I'm proud of and work that meant something to me, but this exists on a totally different plane. Not just because of the story we're telling, but also my relationship with Dav means the world to me. So to get to go through something like that together, and Dav was on set every day, I don't know that I'll ever get an experience like that again, because of our sort of shared history and things, which again is a big part of my career up to this point. But every day going onto that set was an absolute joy. And there was moments that I dreaded, and Dav and I had talked about this. There were certain scenes that I was not looking forward to doing. Actually, a lot of those you haven't seen yet because they come later. But to be able to have Dav as a touch point, to be able to talk through those things, because on any other set, you don't have those sort of relationships with the people you're working with, really, not to the extent that we do. So to be able to genuinely feel like I'm not doing that stuff on my own made it not only a lot easier, but just more special, because we got to do that as a pair. And some of the tougher times for me were also the tougher times for Dav as well, probably on two folds, right? Both because we're telling your story, but also as a friend, watching someone go through some of those things is tough. But as a 10-week and this whatever prep time I had, it was totally unmatched with anything else I've ever done.
Oh, nice. That's good to hear. You know, I think for Dav, you know, how was it like, you know, even, you know, if Sean, you want to chime in too, you know, we are living in this interesting time when it comes to LGBTQ representation, and it's weird because we're kind of policing ourselves, but we're not, and it's like, what does representation look like for the queer community, and how should it, and who has the right to tell that story, and how should we tell it, and blah, 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 all that. It's a long conversation, but when y'all were making this, there are things in the queer community that are kind of canon, as I say, but also there are tropes. When y'all were doing this, how how did you navigate that? How did you all navigate, not falling into tropes, but also maybe even using a tropes as to prove a point? How did you navigate all of that?
Yeah, definitely, because I think, there are pieces of art or work that's inspired me, like for, Tony Kushner's Angels in America had a massive, massive impact on me. I'm talking about, magic realism, we have that in there, and there are angels, all of that stuff. So all of that stuff really did influence me in terms of like when I was finding my voice as a writer. But also, yes, you want to kind of celebrate what's come before, but also have those kind of, as you say, we are in a really interesting place, I think, culturally and in terms of identity politics. And I'm still on that journey, myself, in terms of my own sexuality and my gender and how I identify and what pronouns I use and all of that. And actually, that you haven't seen in episode 2, there's a whole discussion around that too. So it's part of the kind of the textual vernacular of the piece, as well as kind of the aesthetic of it. So, Neverland, that space, which is, and Gabe says at the beginning, I'm not a drag queen, Gabe said, what are you then? Which I think is really interesting, because he doesn't identify himself necessarily as a queen. He doesn't know what that means. And that comes from me, really, because it was, we've got so many things like RuPaul's Drag Race, which has done such amazing stuff, I think, globally. But the type of drag that spoke to me was someone like, there's an artist, do you know Taylor Mack?
Yes, the Max documentary.
Yeah, Taylor Mack I saw perform in Edinburgh back in 2009, and had a really profound impact on me, and actually it's had a bit of influence, I would say, on Gabriel's drag and what that is, and if it's genderless and it's quite fluid, it's not necessarily about gender. And what is gender anyway? All of those things are part of the fabric of what I wanted to discuss. But also, it's more than that too, because it's one facet of his identity. As important for me was exploring the Welsh language and that part of the identity as well. So there's kind of 3 minority perspectives I'm putting up on screen, which is the queer perspective, the adoption perspective, and also a Welsh language perspective too. And dancing that dance, and it's not supposed to provide any easy answers. Gabe is on the journey that I'm on at the same time, I think.
Yeah, I just think that was one thing that stood out to me when Gabriel's character was like, oh, I'm not a drag queen. And I was like, wait. And then I did actually think of Taylor Mack when I was it was more, they are a performer and they just happen to look like they're in drag. For Sean, what was that like for you to get in drag and kind of step into this character who is a drag queen but not?
Yeah, so I remember doing my first costume fitting, and it wasn't any of the costumes that you see on screen. But that stuff, for me anyway, helps so much. I think just in that 5 minutes of being in a specific costume really helped me understand Gabe a lot better than I did at that point. There's something really liberating about wearing something that is an extension of yourself as a character. Because also we didn't really talk that much about the performance stuff. We didn't have those conversations because we knew so much of the expression was via the costumes and then the songs themselves. So we always knew they weren't going to be a big performative aspect. They were never going to be a sort of like, a mini West End show. It was always going to be quite simple and static, and you hopefully let Gabe's voice and his expression through, the fabrics he's chosen or the colours he's wearing or whatever it is, to be the show.
And it's that thing about I think those songs in the show, they actually, rather than it being, as you say, it's not like this outward performance, it's not the mask, it's actually his inner truth.
Yes.
I think that's the moment those are the moments that allow for the authenticity of his internal world and his internal emotion experience to shine through, and that's how the songs function. They're kind of they are the emotional terrain that hold the whole series together.
Yeah, I mean that's what. Well, RuPaul always says this: drag reveals who you really are. Yeah, and it's like because I'm guessing as an actor, when you put on a costume, you embody this character, right? But now you have this extra layer of this character who is also getting into drag to be a kind of extension of himself. Yeah.
Yes, but also when you're wearing certain things that are as uncomfortable as the things.
Were you
that
cinched?
Well. You're forced to hold yourself in a different way. So all of a sudden you're having to think of your physicality in a way that maybe you wouldn't have done when you're just wearing jeans and a t-shirt.
Yeah.
So that stuff is really useful. Not necessarily comfortable, but useful.
But for arts.
for the art, yeah. But also, and I know this applies to me, and maybe that's why it kind of feeds into Gabriel, but I always found that the sequences we shot in Neverland and the songs in particular are when his mind is at its quietest. There's a simplicity to it. There is only one focus, which is the storytelling of that particular song in that moment. So his mind isn't necessarily as busy as it is the rest of the time. And that's, I think that's what hopefully comes across is there's a calm to him on stage, or even, go on.
No, I was gonna just say he seems the most comfortable on stage. Like that's like he seemed most at peace when I saw him because he was just singing and telling his truth. Yeah,
and I think Dav knows that to be the case about me.
Yeah.
So that I think has probably fed into Gabriel.
For both of you, what would it have meant? What would it have meant to you to see a series like this when you were younger?
Oh God! I mean, I mean I'm a massive fan of Russell T Davies and what Russell T Davies has done. So when I saw Queer as Folk, I think it was 1999 and I was 20 years old, and it blew my mind. But I was 20. In my and it is that thing. As a teenager, there was no representation. There's a bit in episode 2 actually where they talk about it, especially in the Welsh language. The often if you saw the gay character was murdered, or they were gay because of abuse, or like it was such negative representation that I grew up with. And that's all part of this internalized shame that you get. It all feeds into all of that. And I just think it's so. It's not just that it's having this story out there, but also it's going out on BBC One in the UK, and BBC One is the kind of the mainstream primary channel, and it's going out on primetime BBC One.
Oh wow!
So that
wow, work.
It's an extraordinary and as I said, not just from a queer perspective, but also a Welsh language perspective. It's the first bilingual Welsh-English drama that's gone out on primetime BBC One, even though the Welsh language is one of the, it's the language of the UK and has, So that to me is a political triumph, that we're getting to tell this story to, I always wanted to make a show that I would enjoy and that I could, that my dad could enjoy too. That's what I've always classed myself in terms of storytelling. Is like I want to be a queer populist. I want to remain authentic to my queerness, but somehow I want to find a way of being able to take that experience out as wide as possibly, because that's where it's on the fringe. That's where the work is done. I think that the more we open out, the more that in diversity enters the mainstream, then we won't be having these conversations anymore,
It's the more specific you get, the more universal it gets. Totally. Yeah. I think we're gonna open up the floor to questions. I can't. Any questions? Don't be shy. Don't. Where I can't see. Oh, okay. There you are.
Thank you so much, and I deeply, deeply connect with what you're saying and with what your show is saying about the unique trauma growing up gay in the 80s and 90s, when the one thing you knew is that if you supposedly chose to be gay, you would instantly get AIDS and go to hell.
Checks out. I'm just joking.
And I just want you to know the show so beautifully evokes that, from the writing and the acting all the way through the production design and the VFX. And I just wondered if you would talk a little bit more about when you took that idea and that concept and that theme to a broader team. Because you as a director pulled that through to the end project.
So I wasn't actually director. I was a music director on it. The director was James Kent.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Then whatever team you were working with, pulled it through so perfectly into execution. And can you just talk about watching that happen and
Sure.
the brilliance of your team of it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's the thing. And it actually starts with casting as well, doesn't it? Because actually that was the moment I was most terrified, because I went, this is a fragile thing, and in the wrong hands, it could turn into something very different. So I think we were incredibly lucky in terms of the cast that we got, but also under the leadership of, so James Kent, the director, James is a really, really experienced, established director, and he's made massive feature films, and he directed a series called The Capture on BBC One, none of which was very similar to Lost Boys at all. And we'd met him, and I remember thinking, because from what I'd watched, I went, I haven't seen anything like Lost Boys. And we just asked him the question very early on in the interview, like, is there anything that you've made that's like Lost Boys? And he went, well, no. And actually, if there was something that, you don't want me to have made something like Lost Boys, otherwise it's not going to be the original thing that we want to make. And I went, that's a good answer. Because it also panders the ego. But within 5 minutes, the way he responded to the scripts emotionally, and I am a bit of a crybaby. He made me cry on the Zoom because I was just like, it was so moving the way he spoke. So I knew immediately, oh my God, I am so in such safe hands. And he has been so careful with the vision, and and also very collaborative with it. You can tell. I think that's such an experienced director who knows their power is often open to the collaborative process, I think. And that's what James was like on set, And then also with the DOP, Philip Harberland, I mean, they were such an extraordinary team who were, I was on set every day. I often didn't need to get involved at all because I could, but also if I needed to say something, I could just quietly talk to James. And James was so like, what? And he'd listen, and then he'd go, yeah, okay, So we just had that. I don't know, I think we had a very magic chemistry. I often say to writers as well, I think it's so important. You need to find your people, And as a queer person, I needed to find my people, And so I know what that's like to not feel safe. So all along the creative process, if I never felt safe, and together with Duck Soup and the BBC, who really looked after me and nurtured me all along the way, if I never felt safe, then it would be a no. That wouldn't be the right decision. And we always worked really hard until I felt safe. It was the right thing, and everyone was in agreement. And sometimes, if someone disagreed, then we found another solution. Yeah. Everyone needed to be happy in the collaboration, and I think that's why, in the end, there was a cohesion between all of the departments.
That's so good to hear when on set and behind the camera just kind of flows smoothly. Is there? Yes, right here.
Ooh. So I work as a composer and as well, and so the first song, Lost Boys and Fairies, it's funny you say Peter Pan. I actually wrote that song with my friend Rob. We co-wrote the lyrics and I wrote the music for a version of Peter Pan back in 2011. And the show, the show was, but there was something about that song where I went, that song needs to live again somehow. There's something about the essence of that song, which is the show itself, really. So, and then I worked very closely with another friend of mine, David Marnie, who was the music producer on the show, and another friend of mine who was in orchestra with me from the age of 15. So, these collaborations are long, they've got a kind of a long history. And Lost Boys and Fairies is an original song in it, and then the rest are covers. And when you see the rest of the series, you see how all the songs. But we had different people working on the orchestrations and all that kind of thing. So it was. So yeah, and that's kind of where my background is. I'm a pianist and all that. So I came to writing later, really, and but I always want to find a way of bringing, because music speaks so directly to us, doesn't it? It's such it just speaks so directly to the heart. So I always want to find ways of bringing music into the show, because I feel like it just goes a bit further.
Yeah. Thank you. That was a good question. Thank you. Other questions? Right there.
I have a question for each of you, if that's okay. I wanted to know, so as a composer, I there's so much flow in the story with the music and with the. I get that now. And I wanted to ask you about your first experience writing a story and the process of getting it produced. And for you, I wanted to ask you in this pilot, which scene did you enjoy making the most? And
Good questions.
So, yes. I mean, it's interesting you talk about the music because I when I write, I do see it like a piece of music. So I write in terms of the music. It feels like a song, or it should feel like a song, or a symphony, almost, in terms of the way that it peaks and it troughs and all those kind of things, and even the jumps between scenes. This is my first show, really. I've written for some telly before. I wrote on a Welsh language show set in a school, but it wasn't my show. It was a really good training ground for writing, but I've been trying for years, for over a decade, trying to develop stuff, and had to have a lot of resilience because everything was a no, and I was getting no's. I'm really grateful now for all those no's because, it's interesting, isn't it, in terms of timing, where I went, no, I had to wait for this one, and I had to wait for the right people. So seeing it kind of manifested was extraordinary. Every day on set, I know this is going to sound quite cheesy, but I was just so grateful. I was like, I couldn't believe it was happening, that all of these people were there making, or there together to tell this story. And I found it deeply humbling and deeply moving. And then when you start seeing the rushes and everything and going, oh my God, it's looking like the thing. Actually, it's not looking like the thing in my head. It's looking even better than the thing in my head. It's a really thrilling thing. But, do you want to talk about your favourite scene in it?
So my favourite scene in this episode, I don't think I have like a particularly specific moment, but Frafi, who plays Andy, he and I, we didn't know each other before this job. We met the night before the read-through for the first time, and any scene with Fra, which was obviously a lot of them, was just a total joy. And we really enjoy each other's company. We are really supportive of each other in terms of what we need work-wise. And it's not often you get to feel as in tune with someone you're working with, especially in filming. Like, you get it a lot more in theatre, but sometimes people can kind of operate on their own sort of separate mindset when you're filming. But I would say that Fra and I were kind of in tune with each other throughout, which just made, whether it was a scene of a sort of significant length or whether it was just a non-dialogue beat, whatever it was, to feel like you're really on the same page with someone just makes it a really nice way to spend your day.
Well, thank you so much. I think that is all the time we have, but thank you all so much for coming out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Dav. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of SeriesFest. Beyonce.